This is Dan Schneider. On this Dan Schneider video interview, I will be interviewing naturalist and author Cy Montgomery. She's written many books on animal life, and the conversation will begin in a moment. Naturalist Cy Montgomery has written many books on animal life and animal kingdom, and she's written many books for children and for adults, and she is my guest today. I like to give each guest of mine a few minutes to give a little bit of background about where they came from, who they are, their interest, and the topic at hand. So welcome, Cy. If you could just give a little bit of background about yourself for those who may not know you.
Sure, Dan. Well, I grew up as the daughter of an Army general and a Southern Belle, a very smart mom who used to work for the FBI and fly a plane and gave it all up to be a housewife. So I grew up as an only child, but my brothers and sisters were other species. I had a wonderful Scottish terrier named Molly who grew up with me. I had many lizards who used to bathe at night with turtles. I had parakeets who used to constantly escape and sit on the chandelier and poop on the beautiful mahogany table. And I always found playmates among the bees and squirrels and birds outside. So naturally, I gravitated to the natural world and continue to have other species in my family to this day.
Now, you're a few years older than me. You were born in the late 50s. You would have grown up in the 1960s when I guess one could say that naturalism or the respect for nature took hold. You had things like The Silent Spring as a book come out. Things like the Jacques Cousteau TV specials were abundant. You had shows like Gentle Ben and Flipper, you know, for entertainment, where animals were the star. Were you a child that grew up watching television and watching the Jacques Cousteau specials and the Flipper and all this stuff, or was it more, or were you more actually with real animals rather than in the popular media?
Oh, every animal I could get my ears or mind around or eyes on, I was there. I loved all those TV shows that you mentioned. I also read every book I could find. But you know, I grew up as a child. We were living on army bases, and there weren't a lot of wild, megafauna tromping around. We had squirrels and rabbits, birds, and bees and worms and beetles and ants, and there's an awful lot to be learned just from watching them. But when my father retired from the Army and then went into the shipping business, we moved to suburban New Jersey, and I thought this was just great because there were now chipmunks, and you might even see a deer now and then. But, it didn't matter to me if the animal was domestic or wild. It didn't matter, if I was reading about it or watching a TV show. Being able to go to these other worlds was what fascinated me. And I was very aware that animals' minds shared a lot with our own, but also make consensus that we don't. So it was a little bit like being able to visit an alien world right on our own planet. And I loved that. And with Molly, for example, my sister, who was a Scottish terrier, with her, she could hear things and see things that I couldn't. So if I hung out with her, I was privy to truths about our world that no one else could really experience, but I could. I was with her. I couldn't experience it directly, but when her ears would stand up at a distant sound that I couldn't hear, at least I knew that sound was there. When she could, she can see at night. A lot of animals have a reflecting tapetum lucidum in the eye, which gives the eye shine when you see animals at night. They're able to see things that we're not able to see, but we know that they're there if we pay attention to them. And that was what I really, really loved about being with animals. It was almost like the show, the movie E.T.
Yeah.
You know how the little boy has this friend who's an alien, and it's so cool. I mean, it's cool to have friends who are human too. And in fact, you know, I grew up to marry a human. I have a lot of friends who are humans. I have a lot of friends who aren't, and I feel really privileged to have these friends, and I feel that they have expanded my imagination, and that they have expanded my moral universe.
You've dealt not only with soft and cuddly animals, that domestic pets and pigs and smarter marine animals like dolphins or whatnot, but you've also written about and experienced animals like insects, arachnids, octopuses, and stuff like that. Are you drawn more to the mammalian world, or do you find, for example, an octopus is quite an intelligent creature too? Do you find that you're more, I guess, Catholic or universal in an attraction to all animals?
Well, I've got to say, ants are fascinating, but I hate it when they get in my clothes. But the octopus was a super fascinating animal for me to know, because if you really would have to go to outer space for science fiction to find somebody like this, more unlike humans than an octopus. You know, they taste with their skin, they change color and shape, they have a beak like a parrot and venom like a snake, and ink that they shoot out. They are so dexterous that a single suction cup can untie surgical silk, and yet a single suction cup can lift 30 pounds. I mean, amazing. But what's maybe even more amazing is that you can get to know someone like this, that you can be friends with someone like this, that they will recognize your face, and we know from experiments they will recognize individual human faces, and that they like certain people and that they dislike others, that they have moods like we do, but they have consistent personalities like we do. But what breaks your heart is that you make friends with an octopus, and they're very short-lived. You may only get to know your octopus for 2 or 3 years or less than that before they're at the end of their lifespan, because you're going to meet them once they're an adult. When they hatch out of a tiny egg the size of a grain of rice, and then they rapidly grow. They're one of the most rapidly growing animals in the world. And so by the time you even meet the octopus may be 2 or 3 years old, and they may only live 3 or 4 or 5 years. So it was thrilling for me to get to know octopuses at the New England Aquarium individually. It was thrilling for me to, you know, expand my world into the sea. They inspired me to learn scuba diving for the first time. In my 50s, I learned scuba diving. And boy, I was a big spaz when I started, but boy, it was so worth it, because it opened the sea to me. And now, you know, I can explore lots of other animals' lives thanks to the octopus leading me into the sea.
You've used the sort of humanized pronouns of he and she to describe animals, both in your work and just now in the first few minutes of this interview. And a lot of people, I guess, would scoff at that and say that's anthropomorphizing. I know when I think of my animals, I've got 4 cats. I've got 1 female and 1 male. I call them she and he, but most people would use it. Do you find that that term is somehow demeaning, it, in reference to animals rather than in regard to their sex? Or is that something that you, I mean, what causes you to use the he and she rather than an it as a pronoun?
Well, for one thing, it's inexact to use it if you have a way of determining the sex of the creature.
Yeah.
And just like with humans, your femaleness or maleness influences who you are. And with an octopus, you can tell what sex they are. You check the 3rd right arm. And if it has suckers all the way to the end, it's a female. If it doesn't, it has what they call a ligula, which is a specialized arm that it uses to place this spermatophore inside her mantle opening to fertilize her eggs. So I prefer to be exact. I prefer to have more information. But I think you're right too. If we called other people it, because we couldn't tell how they identify. I think people would feel upset by it. And, we call it chair in it, but the French don't. A lot of other languages even give chairs sex, although it makes you wonder, are you checking under the seat to see what sex it is? But I remember one time writing a story for the Boston Globe many years ago about a crane who had just laid an egg. And I called that crane she, and they changed it to it. And I was like, well, the animal laid an egg. It's clearly a she. Let's call it. It's not that we're calling it it because we can't tell.
Yeah.
So I think if you can tell, let's be exact about it. Let's give more information rather than less. And the more information you give about any individual of any species or of any age or any sex, the more real that individual becomes to us. The more of a person, and I'm using the word person not to mean people, but person in the old sense. Person comes from the word personae, which means mask. And people were called persons because they were thought to be a mask or a manifestation of the divine. Well, why not see all of animate creation as a manifestation of the creator, of the divine?
Have you found working with some of the more intelligent creatures like an octopus, like some of the corvids or parrots, like the great apes or elephants or what else? Or the pig. Pigs are very intelligent animals, or even cats and dogs have degrees of great intelligence. Do you find that more interesting than, say, working with some animals that, and most ungulates, for example, are not considered the brightest birds. Chickens are not considered as bright as corvids, for example. Do you find that the intelligence of a creature increases your interest in them exponentially, say, or can a chicken be as fascinating as a parrot?
Well, yes, I think that in a way, the animals whose intelligence we don't initially recognize, there's an interesting challenge. Let's see if we can find evidence of that intelligence. And in fact, with chickens, and chickens are widely scoffed at as being unintelligent, but they're not, as it turns out. They can remember 100 faces. They know each other by looking at their faces the same way that we look at human faces. They also have terrific memories for sense of direction, where things are. They're very good at ordering things. We talk about the pecking order. It really is more about order than pecking. It really does matter knowing, who is allowed to feed first, whose alarm calls you can really pay attention to, and who you want to sleep next to, who you want to roost next to at night. Who's who is very important to a chicken. So their intelligence is different in some ways from our intelligence, but similar in other ways. And I love finding that out. And even, I did a book on tarantulas, okay? And don't think of spiders as being particularly intelligent. Well, their intelligence is in a different way than ours. There is some evidence that some tarantulas do recognize individual humans. Some tarantulas can live for 30 years. Wouldn't that make sense for them to learn stuff over those 30 years, to make use of those 30 years that they're living? So while I'm thrilled to recognize similarities that we share with animals who externally don't look like us that much, like an octopus, that's thrilling to me that an octopus moved into my face when my face looks nothing like an octopus face. An octopus's mouth is in its armpits, for example. And the part of the octopus that we think of is the head, the bulbous thing up here above the eyes. That's not their head. That's their mantle. It's like their torso with their reproductive organs and their breathing organs and all that kind of stuff in there. Their head is just the thing around the eyes, and their mouth is on the opposite side. And yet they know to look at our face when they look up through the water at us. And discovering those similarities and differences is one of the things that makes the animal world so endlessly fascinating.
You mentioned looking at the face. I wonder if there is an instinctive drive or understanding in at least all animals that have eyes, that like the religious idea of the eyes being the window to the soul, that every creature looks for the eyes because that can tell, is this creature planning something against me? Is it going to go left or right to try to eat me, kind of thing? Do you think that it would probably have focused on your eyes and said, oh, that's where the wheels of that creature's mind are turning?
Yeah, I think that's a really smart observation. And animals are aware also that their own eyes attract the attention of other creatures. For example, the octopus can disguise its eyes in different ways.
Yeah.
One of the things they do is they make an eye bar to make their eyes look bigger, to make predators think they're a bigger animal. Another thing they can do is they can create a starburst pattern around their eye to disguise it. There are 5 million chromatophores, these special cells full of essentially color and pattern right around the eye, just around the eye. There's billions of chromatophores on the octopus's body, but the eye has a particularly large concentration of them. And as you know, there's lots of creatures like butterflies who have eyes. And they'll try to convince a predator, like, look at these big dots on my wings, so that if you're going to bite them, bite my wings, don't bite my head off. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. And I expect that is why lots of animals will look at our faces, because they are looking for the eyes.
During the reading of The Good Good Pig, which goes about a dozen or more years in the life of Christopher Hogwood, the pig you named, you talk about going off to do other projects for other books that you had written previously. One of them being going to several times go, I think it was to India for a tiger, and your husband was worried about your safety and whatnot. Do you take precautions? Because sometimes people have said, well, some of these people who are tree hugger types, oh, I'm going to go blunder like the guy Grizzly Man, Treadwell, the guy in Alaska who ended up getting him and his girlfriend killed. I mean,
his girlfriend got eaten too.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, do you take rational precautions? Because no matter how much this may be a person defined by the old Latin term, it's still also a predator. A big Bengal tiger or whatever it was, still, if it's hungry and you're getting in its way, it's going to do major damage, if not kill you.
Right. Well, interestingly, these tigers do not attack. They attack from the back. And one of the things that the villagers were doing was they would wear masks on the back of the head to try to convince the tiger that they can't not be seen. We're going right back to the eyes there. So what's important to do in Schunnerman was to make sure someone was looking in all directions, and that's what the villagers did. When I traveled with the forest department, it was routine for the forest department to always have guns. I sure didn't want anybody shooting a tiger on my account. But mostly I traveled with the villagers, and I did exactly what they did, which was just try to keep an eye out. And at one point, my photographer, Diane Taylor Snow, and I had run aground. Our boat had run aground, and we saw there were fresh tiger tracks that were seconds old right by our boat. And we stood back to back on the deck of the boat, and I think she had an axe and I had a machete. And our job was to watch and see if a tiger came running out of the forest to attack us, while the owner of the boat, Jarendranath Rita, and his son were trying to extricate the boat from the mud. That was an exciting moment. And but I think that most animals aren't out to get you unless you make some big mistake. And the biggest mistake we can make is to not be aware that the animal is there, that you have to turn on all your senses on high alert and be vigilant, because animals are very vigilant.
Well, let me ask a couple of questions about how your views on the animal world uh, affect your opinions on other things, like religion or politics. What religion are you, if any? And is if you are religious or your own personal belief system, how has it been affected by animals?
Mm, that's a great question. No one's asked me that. I was raised Methodist, and the church was always very important to me. When we moved here to New Hampshire, the church in town, who had a fabulous pastor, we still have a fabulous pastor, by the way, but I was good friends with that pastor. I loved his sermons, and I actually was deaconess for a while. So, and I love the songs, and I grew up um, following the example of Jesus. Now, I believe that there's lots of ways to God, and some of those ways are through people whose lives are good and just, and you can model yourself on those lives. But there's lots of other ways, I think. I think the world is a lot more holy than we realize. And one of the things I learned in India from the pantheon of gods and goddesses is that there are so many roots to God. There are so many inspirations to meet the Creator and to celebrate the holiness of the world. There's this wonderful quote that's attributed to Thales of Miletus, and it goes like this: the world is alive and has fire in it and is full of gods. And I love that quote because what it says to me is that there's so much life around us, fiery, incandescent, brilliant life, and that there's holiness all around us. And that's how I try to live my life, inspired by all of these other creatures and by so many great men and women who have lived just, inspiring lives.
Let me ask about global warming, which is nature's biggest threat, or probably in the next century or so. Um, I'm someone who's middle ground. I don't think like the worst case scenario. People who think that Earth is going to turn into a Venus and all life will be extinguished. But I certainly don't think that we should go along doing what we're doing. We should get off of fossil fuels as quickly as possible. We should look for renewable resources and do what we can, I guess, to try to restore things like the Great Barrier Reef, stop, logging, try to at least slow down the Antarctic melt and the Arctic too, so that polar bears don't go extinct and things like that. You've actually been to a lot of these places. I assume you've been to places like the Great Barrier Reef and whatnot. Do you see things as more dire than your average person, or do you have hope for the future that, say, in 50 years or so, towards the end of this century, that we'll have overcome some of these problems and restored some of the things that we've damaged in the 200 years since the Industrial Revolution started?
Well, it depends on what we do right now. I mean, we are right now, I think, at this really critical turning point. And I'm very nervous about what's going to happen. I mean, it looks like, maybe the planet isn't going to look like Venus, but within 50 years, we could lose New York City. We will lose New Orleans if things keep going like this. In 50 years, we will lose the Great Barrier Reef. There is no disagreement, as you know, from the scientists who've studied this. And I'm very much hoping that leaders on both sides of the aisle here in America can step up and be real leaders so that this catastrophe doesn't happen. There is no doubt that this is caused by our pollution. There's no doubt at all. All the science says that we are causing it. But the great news is that because we're causing it, we can stop it. So if we were up to this and turn around, we could be great leaders for world economy too. You know, in as you say, leading the world in green technology. Are we going to do this, or are we going to stay with toxic, poisonous, planet-killing oil? We've got to get off oil. It is ridiculous, though. We have a lot of technologies. Okay, I drive a Prius, which, by the way, is not great in snow, which we have plenty of. But, you know, I can get 50 miles an hour. I can't believe that everyone isn't driving a car that gets 40 miles to the gallon when the technology is available. Why are we allowed to even drive around creating this horrendous pollution? Why aren't we supporting that technology more than we are now? And there's so much that we can do as individuals, but our leaders really have to step up to the plate. And I am hoping that they will do so.
Yeah, I'm actually going to be interviewing a fellow who wrote a book about Islamic extremism, and the interesting thing is, I think if we get off of oil, the funding that fuels a lot of the extremism in the Middle East is going to be gone too, and I think that'll have a political benefit as well. Let me ask you about vegetarianism or veganism, because from what I've always read, you know, it takes so much more energy to produce an adult cow to slaughter and eat, and putting aside the ethical issue of factory farming and that kind of thing. But it seems just on a carbon footprint basis that a lot of the production of meat is wasteful of resources. So if you could address veganism or vegetarianism on a carbon footprint basis, and then also on the ethical basis too, and whether or not you're a vegetarian or a vegan.
Yeah, I've been a vegetarian for 30 years. I read Animal Liberation by Peter Singer, both of them, but never that. I just couldn't. And you're absolutely right. This is one of the ways that we can, by cutting out or eliminating meat, all of us can cut out some meat. I don't want to be part of a system that rewards waste, that rewards cruelty. Now, it is true that from an animal welfare standpoint, that there are farms where animals are cared for in a loving way, and are slaughtered in a relatively painless way. And I would say, if you want to eat meat, that's the meat for you. But we can all cut down on meat. Everybody tells us that, you know, no matter how the meat is raised, because it's so far up on the food chain, there's a lot more toxic chemicals, a lot more antibiotics in meat. It's better for you to eat less meat. And I'm a pretty healthy person at 58 years old. And I attribute a lot of my health to being vegetarian. And it does really help the planet. And I know a lot of people, food is so hard because, you know, it's so attached to family and traditional, all this kind of stuff. But I would suggest people try some vegetarian options and just do some more vegetarian vegan options. And they're delicious. Anything you cut down, any way you can cut down on meat consumption, I think is going to help. You know, I think forcing people, like taking away their Thanksgiving turkey, that's not going to cause people to run over to vegetarianism. But meatless Mondays, that's a great idea. And once you discover how healthful and delicious these options are, I think folks will be eating more and more vegetarian. Are you vegetarian or vegan, Dan, by the way? You know a lot about it. I was impressed.
No, but I mean, as I've gotten older, I found my own tastes have gone away from generally meat. I had some colon issues 7, 8 years ago, so I basically cut out red meat. If I do have meat, it's usually chicken or fish. But I found, I don't particularly like sweets as much as did. And this actually leads into my next question, is that because a lot of the meat production is for, say, fast food places, and a lot of poor people depend on that, how do we make it economically viable, do you think, to switch off of this Big Mac and Whopper kind of uh, diet that so many poor people, because they are poor, can only afford this bad, cheap processed meat rather than eating healthy, rather than eating a salad from the, because kids get indoctrinated into this by their poor parents who stop by at the local, fast food joint.
Yeah, part of the problem is not so much the lack of money, but the lack of information. Because actually, it's just as cheap to have a meal of rice and beans as it is to go to McDonald's. But here's the problem. One, a lot of times folks don't know that. A lot of times folks who are poor, they're working very hard. They might be working 2 or 3 jobs. They do not want to go home and make the beans. I mean, if you start them soaking early in the day, you can actually just boil them for an hour, and there's your beans and there's your rice. But it's so much faster to swing by and grab some French fries and a Coke and a Big Mac. But you actually can eat well cheaply, and there's a number of different websites people can go to. I mean, rice and beans is a very, it's eaten throughout. South America is the main staple. Sometimes you can have some fish in it. Sometimes you can put some delicious sauce in it to change it up. Put a scrambled egg in there, and that's full of perfect balanced protein. But it takes a little longer to prepare. Same thing, even if you get organic vegetables, which are more expensive. I think the issue is knowing how to prepare them and spending the time that folks don't have or feel that they don't have to prepare them. I think it kind of starts with knowledge, though, knowing how to shop for the inexpensive stuff and how to make it taste as good as a burger that you could have like that.
I want to end this segment and then get into the next segment about the Good Pig specifically. But I wanted to ask a question, I guess, just your ideas on the idea of humaneness and humanity. I mentioned that, as we're recording this at the end of 2016, there's a lot of strife in the Middle East, and a lot of people are pessimistic about human nature. A fellow named Steven Pinker, a well-known scientist and social psychologist, wrote a book a few years ago talking about humanity has gotten a lot more peaceful than in its early days on a per capita basis. So there seems to be a human movement or progression away from violence, but of course we still have murder, we still have organized criminals, terrorists, wars that break out here and there. Do you think that it's asking too much for human beings to be more humane towards animals, since we can't even seem to, in many ways, be as humane as we can be towards other human beings?
Well, that's a good question, I hear a lot of people ask that, but it kind of assumes that we only have 1 cup of compassion, and if we pour that out, then it's going to be empty. But in fact, we have a bottomless well of compassion, and compassion begets compassion. So, if you're kind to your cat and your mother and the stranger at the store and the poor person that you haven't met but that you donate to through some charity, it doesn't suck up all your love. Instead, it fills you up. It doesn't cost us, really, to care for others. It blesses us to care for others. And the more other that soul can be, I think the deeper the blessing and the more expansive our hearts become.
Well, let me end this segment. In the next segment, I do want to talk about the book, The Good, Good Pig, and the animal that inspired it, and we'll do that in a moment. I am conversing with naturalist Cy Montgomery. She's written, oh, looks like about 20 books overall, both for children and adults, on mainly the animal kingdom. And the book that I read some months ago that got me to want to talk to Cy was a book called The Good, Good Pig. And I've also read some other animal books, and hopefully I'll have some other animal authors that I'll be speaking to as well. And the reason I did so is because the last couple of years I've been in sort of a down period of my life, and I wanted to read something that was not that complicated, not necessarily, although you can get some great stuff from a great novel or a great book of poems. But I've always had a love of animals. I've only owned cats. I've got 4 cats now. I've had maybe 7 or 8 other cats over the years that have died. And while I like dogs, I prefer cats. But the book, The Good, Good Pig, you write about a little runt pig called Christopher Hogwood, based on an author of the same name. And tell me a little bit about this animal for those who haven't read the book, because it seems to me, at least as portrayed in this book, that this was the animal maybe closest to your heart over all others. Am I correct in that? Or?
He kind of was my anchor to home, and he saved me in a big way. He came home on my lap in a shoebox. He was such a tiny little guy. He was half the size of all the other runts of this piggery, and he was very sick. He came at a crucial time in my life. My father, the Army general who I worshipped, actually got in trouble at Sunday school because I said I loved him as much as Jesus. He was dying of cancer. And when I was in Virginia taking care of my dad, my husband got a call from friends of ours who had a piggy, and they had this sick pig who they thought would just die unless they found a home for him. And they asked if we could take him. And I was gone. Howard said, "My God, she's always trying to adopt every animal in the world. Normally I wouldn't even tell you called, but her father is dying, and maybe this is just the thing she needs." And Christopher Hogwood was exactly what I needed, because all my love could not cure my dying father, but it could save this little pig. And he grew up to weigh 750 pounds. He lived for 14 years. He became such a character in town that every year we had an election, he'd get write-in votes. And everyone loved this guy. He brought so much into my life. He's the one who introduced me to my neighbors. Now, I was very shy with humans growing up. And so, and also I'm a writer, and I was either home or in some jungle a lot of the time. I didn't know all the neighbors. But if you have a pig that breaks out of his stall and suddenly shows up on people's lawn, that's how you get to know your neighbors. And he was so charming that by the time I got over to collect him, people had already made friends with him. And I was able to benefit from his reflected glory. So he made a lot of friends for me. He also brought children into my life. I never had brothers or sisters. I never had children really as friends when I was a child. Most of my friends were adults, or they were other species, or they were like plastic dinosaurs or something. But Chris is the one who brought kids into my life, because kids love a big friendly pig. And he also showed me kind of the beauty that the world offers you every day right here at home. Because pigs love the same things that we love. They love chocolate donuts. They love the stroke of loving hands. They love the feel of the sun on their skin. They love the smell of ripened apples. They love all these things that are available to us every day, but they insist on having it. And so many times Christopher Hogwood pulled me away from whatever screen I was looking at to at least spend some time every day enjoying life outside and being with friends.
Um, just looking at the photos of Christopher in the book, he has that sort of modeled look that a lot of domesticated animals have. Let me just step back evolutionarily and just ask you a little bit about the domestication of pigs, because when we think domesticated animals, we naturally think of cats and dogs as the two most, you know, populous or the most popular pets. But certainly pigs and cows were domesticated from wild animals. Cows from things like, I think, even a little bit of the ancient aurochs of Europe led to some of the modern cows. Pigs developed from wild boars, and these were large, aggressive, tusked animals that even in the wild today, in places, I guess, like Sumatra or whatnot, can kill a human being. Um, why were pigs domesticated? Were they domesticated simply for meat, or were they initially domesticated for companionship? Because from what I've read, mottling colors are sort of the way to all animals tend to get that. I have a cat, Oscar, who has that mottled cow look, and so tell me a little bit of background about the domestication of pigs, why they were domesticated.
Pigs were domesticated for meat, but pigs are really smart, and they saw a good deal when they when they recognized that if they could hang out with us, we would give them food, we would give them shelter. I think it was probably pretty willing. And even people who raise animals to kill them, find that pigs steal your heart. Pigs are so smart, and they can be extremely effective. And they're very sensual beings. They love to be petted and stroked and all this kind of stuff. And if you raise them from a baby, they're not aggressive at all, or to hurt you. Example, at 750 pounds, he could be trusted with people in wheelchairs. He could be trusted with small children. One of his good friends had cancer, which eventually killed her. But her parents would bring her after grueling chemo treatments to be in the company of a 750-pound pig with pointed tusks, and he would be absolutely tender with her.
Yeah, I'm trying to look up I know I read another book recently about uh, animal rights. And I wanted to actually do a show later on about animal rights, and I can't find it. But there was a fellow who wrote a book um, who was talking about. It wasn't John Katz. It wasn't John Grogan. Let me see. Analyze. Well, I can't find it now. But anyway, the fellow had basically argued that one of the things that in animal rights activists don't tend to realize is that some animals, while it might be bad for the individual pig or chicken or cow to end up being used for meat, it has been a boon for the species as a whole, for the pig, capital P pig, pigness, that there are millions of more pigs than there ever would have been had they just remained wild boars. Do you find a sort of truck with that kind of idea, in the sense that an animal like Christopher, who basically got a good deal, lived and died a natural life, even though many of his brethren didn't? Uh, I mean, do you ever balance those kinds of ethical ideas when thinking about animals?
Well, I can't help but think about individuals.
Yeah.
And, there could be, the thought is horrifying because we're very overpopulated as a species ourselves. But we certainly could make a whole lot more people if we forced every person of breeding age to have babies. But I don't think anyone would say, gee, this is a real wonderful thing for humanity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think, the individual animal probably doesn't care whether there's a whole lot of pigs on the planet or just a few. I mean, maybe I'm speaking as an only child. I was happy being an only child.
It was Michael Pollan who wrote The Omnivore's Dilemma.
Okay, yeah. And really, great thinking guy, and I've read The Omnivore's Dilemma, and he urges us. I think he's the one who says, "Eat food, mostly plants,
Yeah.
not too much." I think that's a very good idea.
Um, a lot of people think of pigs as being these dirty animals, but from what I've read, that it's that's a myth. That in their natural environment, pigs don't run around in their feces and mud. It's just the way that farmers for centuries have treated pigs. Is that correct too? Are pigs naturally clean?
They're naturally pretty clean, although a lot of animals do like mud. They don't like to be in their own feces.
Yeah.
Nobody likes that, pretty much. Well, that's not true. Hippos usually do pretty well with their own feces, but for various reasons. But pigs will keep a latrine area,
Hmm.
and they like to sleep in a clean area. The reason that they like mud sometimes is that their skin is very sensitive, like ours, and they can get a sunburn, and they can't find any sunscreen,
Hmm.
so they use mud. Mud also helps cool them off when they're hot. So they're not doing it to be dirty, and mud isn't really like dirty the way we think of feces
Yeah.
being dirty. You are absolutely right too to point out that there are farmers who keep animals in really deplorable conditions, and for a long time they countered this by giving animals antibiotics, because otherwise they would get sick in these awful conditions. Then they discovered that antibiotics made animals grow faster, gain weight faster. And this is one reason that the amount of antibiotics in animal feed that humans are suffering from
Resistance.
strains of bacteria like MRSA that can't be cured by antibiotics. We're breeding superbugs because we're feeding too much of it to animals to artificially gain weight and artificially help them to thrive in dirty conditions.
Talked about an octopus. We talked about some other intelligent animals, and we mentioned that the pigs are smart. How does the porcine mind, if we want to call it that, differ from the mind of your typical Irish setter or your typical house cat, or even those of a great ape or a dolphin, which are also very intelligent animals? Is there such a thing as, does a pig, other than obviously the senses being different, does a pig view a world as we know different than, say, a dog or a cat does, in the way it relates,
Yes.
especially to humans?
Yes, I think so. And one thing that I noticed very much about Christopher Hogwood was, even though he was extremely powerful, he had, his head probably weighed 100 pounds. He had extremely strong jaws. He had pointed tusks. He could bite. Like a person could kill you. The guy in the subway could kill you. A pig could kill you too, but he's not gonna. But he's an ungulate. He has hooves. He's related to horses and deer and cows. And the thing about ungulates is those hooves were made to run away from predators. And even though Christopher was so strong and so powerful, things would scare him. And he would run away. And he would scream. So he was the first ungulate that I really got to know well. And in this, he was very different than the carnivores that I've known. I've known cats and dogs, and they're not utterly fearless, but they know they're predators. And the first time I saw Chris really run away from something, I immediately recognized the heritage that his hooves had given. They know. But the other thing is, they're smart. They will make really good friends with individual people. They will give individual people special greetings. Their voices, they have quite a range in their voices, in their grunts and stuff. He had special grunts he just gave to my husband, Howard. He had special grunts he just gave to the little girl I was telling you about who had cancer, Kelly. Special grunts for the little girls who live next door. And really a special grunt for a particular friend we had who was quite heavy. And I think Christopher realized this guy knew where the food was and that he'd better make friends with this guy.
Yeah. With with his senses as an ungulate, you mentioned predators. They have generally a good vision. Cat vision can differ from dog vision. They have good smell. What what senses inform an ungulate's mind? Because they'd be low to the ground. I would think a pig, with truffles would have excellent smell. Is smell the best of their five main senses?
Yes, yes, absolutely. They have a fantastic sense of smell.
And it was never mentioned in the book that I recall. Did you ever use Christopher as sort of a breeding stud for little piglets or other people around the area? Or was he just a satisfied eunuch? Or do you actually spay or neuter pigs?
Yeah,
like
he came to me having been castrated.
Okay.
So it was not an option. But, I mean, it would have been very awkward if he had felt romantic towards me, particularly since he was a big guy, and a different species, and I was already married.
Well, if I recall, you did have some other animals on your farm, and maybe I'm mixing up books, but I think you had typical other barnyard beasts. To what degree did he relate to other species? Was he more solicitous towards the humans because you had the more daily interaction and you were bringing him his food and whatnot, or was he friendly with any other pets that you had?
He didn't. He and our border collie Tess really didn't seem to care about each other at all, and they would focus on me. And there were times when they'd both be coming toward me and ignoring each other to the degree that one might run over the other. It was really quite odd. He also, the chickens liked to hang out with him. A lot of them, sometimes they liked to sleep on him. He didn't seem to mind this, and they would come and eat some of his leftover food, and he didn't seem to mind this either. So I think he was friends with the chicken.
Finally, in regarding to Christopher, since you've written the book a few years back, have you found yourself, I guess, the go-to girl for pig culture? If like Good Morning America calls or something, or do you prefer to think of yourself as a naturalist in general, since you've written about many other animals?
Well, I'm honored if people ask me pig questions, and I do get a lot. I'm getting a lot of octopus questions these days because of the soul of an octopus. And we're hearing from my current border collie. This is Thurber. Thurber, honey, do you want to come? Come. Over it. I'm sorry. No problem. But I'm glad that he's maybe going to have the last word.
Okay.
Which is appropriate.
Well, let's end this segment at that note, and we'll wrap up in a few minutes and give you some final thoughts. We'll do that in a moment. Wrapping up my talk with naturalist Cy Montgomery, you've written about many animals. What are you working on currently, and what species of animal has captured your fancy in recent years, if any?
Well, I just finished a book for younger readers on hyenas. It's in the Scientists in the Field series that originated with Nick Bishop for Hilton Mifflin for readers in grades 4 through 8. And I got to work with wonderful researcher Kay Holkamp in Masai Mara in Kenya this summer. Hers is one of the longest running studies of any animal anywhere in the world. And that was fantastic. I flew back home to launch the Great White Shark Scientist that came out this past summer, and then turned around and went back to Africa, this time to Tanzania, with the world's top expert on wildebeest, Dr. Dick Estes. And he and I have been friends for 30 years. I've been wanting to go with him on the wildebeest migration, and finally, the guy's 88 years old. We went together, and we're doing a book for young adults. I'm also working on a memoir for young adults called How to Be a Good Creature, which is about 12 animals who I've known who've shown me different aspects of what it means to be a good creature. And I've got a kids book coming out on octopus, on Inky the octopus, the one who from New Zealand. He was at the Auckland, New Zealand aquarium. He'd been captured wild, right in the water outside the aquarium. And one day someone left the lid of his tank ajar. He got out, went down the drain, and went home. So I'm working on that too. And in the spring, I'm planning to go to California for a book on California condors.
Yeah, there was something a year or two ago, I think, in Catalina Island, where weren't they trying to restore the condors of some bird or something, and they ended up killing a lot of invasive species?
Very successfully restored condors to the wild. They're still ongoing, but they captured every single surviving California condor, and so there were none in the wild. And bred them in captivity. And right now, the biggest threat to them is they eat garbage, plastic, and lead. And this is what is killing them in the wild.
Yeah, I know.
I
know there's that ring of plastic that floats around the Pacific or something. I forget what it's called.
Garbage patch.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know what I've heard is that by the year 2050, scientists project there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish. So we got to do something. And that's what all my books are really meant to do. You know, they're meant to reach out to readers and say, look at these wonderful souls out there belonging to other creatures. Don't you just love this? Don't you want to preserve the world for them? Don't you just want to fall back in love with life? And once you're that in love with life, you don't want to be a part of the pollution. You don't want to be a part of the destruction. You don't want to be part of the killing. You want to be part of this beautiful, green, living world. Every book I write is really just a song of praise to that beautiful, sweet, green and blue living planet.
Before you die, is there one group of or species that you'd like to write about that you haven't written about yet?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, tons of animals. God, I want to do a lot more stuff in the ocean. I want to do a book on rays. I'm actually pursuing this. A lot of sea creatures. I've never seen a polar bear. I really want to see a polar bear. I've met penguins before. I actually went to one of the first international conferences on penguins, which was in New Zealand, but I would love to go to Antarctica and write about penguins. There's so many other mammals I want to write about, and so many other invertebrates. And there's no end. I want to live a long time.
Well, I was just thinking that would be interesting, since you mentioned ants earlier. If you ever did a study of like superorganisms, the ants and the bees and whatnot, and how a superorganism differs from, say, an organism or is similar. But anyway, I want to thank Sai for spending an hour or so speaking about her work and career, and thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure.